Hello and welcome to the USB Brown Bag for June 4th, 2014. I'm your host, John Harris, and tonight we're going to be covering CCNA routing and switching. This is going to be a two-part series. We're just kind of trying to cover some of these networking components. And tonight we have Scott McDermott on the line, and you can get him at this Scott M32768 on Twitter. Ed Henry was supposed to also be on to be helping with this. He ran into some issues. He was troubleshooting some issues this evening, so he may or may not be able to hop on. But if he hops on, we'll have even some more great knowledge sharing. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. So right now we're doing the Cisco certification track. You can view the schedule at professionalvmware.com. Definitely go ahead and follow along at the vBrownBag. Or hashtag vBrownBag on Twitter, and we'll be you can put questions up there. You can put them in the question window, and we'll get to answering those when we can. Definitely, if you're in a different time zone or anything of that sort, we've got sessions and these going on all over the world at this point. So definitely hop on those, or if you can't make them, hop on the site. They're all uploaded up there. Just pull one down and view it. And with that being said, what I'm going to probably be doing and is going ahead and turning it over here to Scott. Scott, hello. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we can have a good session.
And with that being said, while we're bringing that up, do you want to give everybody a little bit of, just background on you, Scott? And
yeah, my name is Scott McDermott. I am the network engineer, but I haven't been doing that my entire time in IT. I've got a lot of system administration experience, and then later went into network engineering. And I blog at mostlynetworks.com if you're interested in that. And then I'm on Twitter with @ScottM32768, and the 32768 will, as you go through your CCNA studies, will eventually present itself, and you go, oh. But you'll have to study to find out what that number actually means. It's not a CCIE number, although I would have really liked to have gotten that one. They're way past that now. So, my screen's working, I assume, right? Yes.
Yes, we can see what you got there up on the screen,
Fantastic.
Scott.
So, before I get started, I have some door prizes. So I have several copies of the CCNA routing and switching library, which is like this 2-book series that has all the study materials and some practice tests that Pearson/Cisco Press has kindly given me to give away. So this session will go better if we have questions and we can make it more interactive. So I think what I'm going to do is, for the best 2 or 3 questions that we get tonight, that those people will get their choice. Actually, I also have some copies of the Networking for VMware Administrators. I think that's the correct title, the Chris Wall book.
Ooh, that
an earlier podcast, yeah.
That's impressive.
So I have copies of that too. So for the best questions, I'll let you choose, and then we'll go from there. So, which means I have to have some way to contact people. So I didn't think that through. So if at the end of the session, don't leave. Let us figure out. Okay, I'm going to move on. We'll figure out how to do that one way or the other. But I've got door prizes. So if you've got a good question, you can send me an email, maybe, scottim@mostlynetworks.com,
or maybe they just hit you up on Twitter with the vBrownBag hashtag, and we kind of go from there.
Yeah, that would probably be better if they can do that. But
so,
if not on Twitter or something bizarre like that, then we can work something else out. But otherwise, we can do it on Twitter. Anyway, good door prizes. Also, I have some copies that I will be able to give away in the future. So if you're watching this recording later, I think probably maybe until the end of June, I will let this run. And if you've got more questions or comments or anything, let me know, and then I will pick some people maybe at random for that. Just make sure you include the vBrownBag hashtag in your Twitter questions, and then we will go from there and get some people some free books courtesy Cisco Press.
Awesome.
Right. Well, and actually VMware Press because of the Chris Wall book. So we have the CCNA routing and switching. There was a previous session that was on the CCENT, and there's actually 2 tests in this setup, or 1 test. It's a kind of an unusual Cisco certification in that respect. So there's a CCENT, which actually maps to this 100-101 test, or the ICND1, and the ICND1 is actually referring to, it's the name of the test, but it's also the class that goes along with that particular exam. Almost all of Cisco's exams have a class that go along with them, and the 2 names match. So you have a choice of taking the ICND1, which would then earn you the CCENT, and then later you could go and take the ICND2, and then that would earn you the CCNA on top of the CCENT. Or if you feel like you want to take on a slightly bigger project, a slightly bigger test, because it's a little bit bigger, a little bit longer, more questions, but it has questions from both the ICND1 and the ICND2 tests, then you can do this 200-120 exam, which sends you straight to the CCNA. Interestingly, it doesn't actually earn you the CCENT as well. So if you go straight to CCNA, you don't get the CCENT. And important, this is the Cisco website. There's tons of information on the learning. Yeah, it's learning.cisco.com. learningnetwork.cisco.com. And a lot of this, there's a lot of great information on navigating the Cisco site and where all this information is in the CCNT episode. And he also talks a bit about subnetting, which is critical for these exams. So if there's nothing else you learn subnetting. And he talks about some great stuff in that. So that would be a really good session to go to if you haven't already. We've got here a comparison chart. So this kind of gives you something of an idea of the level of experience, the job titles, and probably more importantly, the technologies, the types of equipment that are involved that they cover in the exams from a very high-level view, so you can kind of get an idea of where you want to go. If you feel like you're in this CCNP area, if you want to actually earn the CCNP, you have to do the CCNA at least first. So you kind of have to work your way up, whether you want to or not. But this is only a very high-level view. So I got to go over here to the really important stuff. The blueprint of the exam. Cisco has recently changed the way they give their blueprints. It used to just be this big list of technologies, and now you actually have weighting so you can see where you really need to focus. So here with the ICND1, I don't particularly care for the way they've set up this web page, but it does give you the idea. And there's keywords that you can look for, like recognize the purpose and function. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to configure it. It might in a different section say you have to be able to configure it, but identify means, you can recognize things for what they are. Describe the purpose and basic operations, so there's going to be questions on the test that expect you to have some knowledge of OSI and TCP/IP in this case. So as you go through looking at this, trying to decide what you need to study, pay attention to what the keywords are. So identify, configure. There are topics in here where you only have to kind of have a high-level understanding of it. There's others where you need to have an understanding of it, at least enough to be able to configure and verify. So this kind of gives you an idea between the weights that they assign in the different sections and the topics that are covered in the sections. Kind of gives you an idea of where you need to focus the most effort. Not that you shouldn't focus effort there, but if you're running out of time to study, for example, then focusing on the 6%, probably not the best use of your time, whereas focusing on IP routing, if that's a weak area, then that's definitely the direction to go. And they do a pretty good job of breaking out the various subjects that are here. So you need to do serial and Ethernet. You don't have to worry about old technologies like ATM. I don't think there's actually any MPLS knowledge expected, with the possible exception of knowing how to hook it up, but that would be more of a WAN piece, so that would be in the ICND2 section. So, but this all gives you kind of an idea. So they also conveniently make a PDF available where it's all in one. You could turn it in. I've seen people turn that into checklists and stuff. And the other important thing is they've got, well, this recommended training tab's not that useful unless you actually want to go take a class. But the additional resources doesn't have the topics on it that I expected to have anymore. There's Cisco Press has, for the most part, really good books. Wendell Odom, I believe, does the books for the CCNA, and they're actually pretty good books. I would recommend reading those if you're studying. Often you can get deals on ebooks if you buy them directly through Cisco Press. If you want to buy, if you don't win one tonight, and you want to buy the paper copy, then probably the best place to go is Amazon. They usually have the best deals. This also tells you, so this is the ICND2, which in some ways is maybe more, the split is kind of weird between these. So here we go. A little bit different technologies. So here now we're talking about Metro Ethernet, MPLS, T1s, ISDN. The key part about this is these are only identified. So you don't have to necessarily know how to even configure all of these technologies, but you have to at least have a conceptual understanding of how those might be used. Whereas if you go further down, you need to be able to configure and verify the WAN serial connection. You need to be able to configure and verify a PPP connection, frame relay, and some basic troubleshooting of PPP over Ethernet, which is really for ADSL, DSL type connections. So those help you get a good idea of what to do there. There was one nifty little graphic that I had.
Hey there, Scott. A question did come through here on the question pane, so I was going to go ahead and repeat that. Grant Mitchell, and this was kind of going around in my mind too, is is it useful to use something like a GNS3 or better with a physical lab? What do you suggest? Because I know with the CCNA even, because I went and
Yeah, at the CCNA level, and probably also for most of the CCNP stuff, but certainly at the CCNA level, the level of detail that they go into, everything is it's a very broad test. It covers a lot of different technologies and a lot of different topics, running the gamut from a little bit of switching, a little bit of routing, various routing protocols, all these different things. There's a ton of stuff in there, but they don't expect you to know it very deeply. So then something like GNS3, which there was an earlier session on that also. I think it was called Building a Virtual Lab. But for example, here I have a GNS3 running, and I have 4 virtual routers, and they've got some serial links and some frame relay, and you can do almost everything you could possibly need to study. So here, for example, I've got a telnet session open to this R1 router, and this GNS3 is a GUI interface to a piece of software called Dynamips, and basically it builds more or less a virtual, actually I wouldn't say virtual, I would say emulated Cisco router, and then you can run an iOS image within that, and then you have a full version of iOS. So if we look at the show version here, it thinks that I'm running this on an old Cisco 3725. Hands-on time with real hardware is always the best, but especially when you're working at when you're trying to acquire a more of an entry-level type certification. A lot of times because you're not necessarily doing that job, it's hard to have access to the equipment. Having access to the hardware is always best, but at the CCNA level, you can do almost everything you need to do with GNS. It's a good way to test things out, and you can do all kinds of stuff. So we can see, I've got routes here. I've got some OSPF running, and you can do all of your routing practice. The one thing that you can't do everything that you might want to do in GNS3 is switching. There is a little bit of switching, so you can set up trunks, .1Q trunks, but the switching capability is limited because what it actually does is it emulates a switching card in a router, which is not really the same thing as a proper layer 2 or layer 3 switch.
Yep, and if I remember correctly, when I took the CCNA a couple times, I didn't end up renewing it, but being able to have those skills, at least have some some hands on the keyboard time, and being able to at least do some basic routing configurations and things of that sort was quite important. Or at least being able to troubleshoot if there was an issue.
Yeah, and if you don't have a lot of stick time with routers, the GNS is going to be critical because there are, in the CCNA exam, there will be simulations where you are presented with an iOS command line, and you will be expected to do configurations and troubleshooting tasks within a simulated iOS environment. So if you don't have hands-on time, you're not going to be able to complete those. And there's going to be times where you get, output from a command. There'll be some Cisco show command that'll come up in the test, and it'll say, might ask you, what's wrong with this, or which of the, like, for example, a kind of question that might come up is, what it might have a ERGRP output might come up, and it might ask you, and might show EIGRP output from 2 different routers. It might ask you, do they have a full connection, or why isn't their connection coming up? And you'll have to sort of troubleshoot just by looking at the output. If you've been doing this in GNS3, that's not going to be too difficult. I don't remember there being much emphasis on the switching side, so there's a little bit, but not very much. I think it's more about, well, I guess we should actually find out. So here we go, LAN switching technologies. So it covers spanning tree and how root bridges are elected. And over here we have basically basic knowledge about how switches work, and a bunch of settings which really all cross the border between both routers and switches. So with the exception, I think, of DTP, and that might even be in there, but I think everything else is going to work. And I suspect that this is actually, the DTP topic is probably going to be more about, do you understand how it works? Because there's a bunch of variables in there, and I might be able to talk about that next time, but I don't have the switch set up so I can do that.
All right.
Go ahead.
All right, there, Scott. And there actually was another question. This Graham Mitchell, man, he's on it. He's going to be one of our winners. But and there was a little bit of follow-up in there. But yeah, are there any practice exams available, anywhere, or ones that you would suggest for people preparing for the exam or anything of that sort?
I am a big fan of Boson. They make some really good products, and they have practice exams for the CCNA. And if you want to get, they have this. So they have two products. They have this XSIM product, and they have the NetSIM product. And what XSIM is basically it's practice exam. It looks and feels almost identical to a Cisco exam. It will ask you questions that are very similar to the kinds of questions at a very similar difficulty level to what a Cisco exam is going to give you. And if you get it wrong, and even if you get it right, it gives you really good explanations as to why the right answer is right, why the wrong answers are wrong. So you can actually learn through that. And it gives you links to Cisco documentation, and it's really good. I've used these in the past. I'm very happy with the products that they make. I find them to be very valuable. There is also, in the practice exam specific area, and actually let me finish BOSIN and then I'll move to where I was going to go. They also have this product called NetSim, and the NetSim product is sort of like GNS3, but it's a simulator, and it's maybe a little bit more like the simulators that are in the Cisco test, but it creates a simulated, oh, I'll just click on the link here. So there, see, as you can see in their picture, it creates a simulated environment, and it's not quite the same thing as GNS3, but it is similar. And it has all kinds of labs, which is probably the most valuable part of it. It has all kinds of labs, so each each lab will have like a PDF, and you can go in and it'll say, hey, go configure this on these switches. So then you can actually go into what looks and feels like a Cisco command line, and you can do all the configuration, and then when you're done, you can actually check your work because the answers are in there too. So they have a product that builds on the CCNA exam for the CCNP, and I used that for a lot of my practice there because I didn't have access to extra switches at the time, so I could practice for the switching exam. So this is a good product too. It's not super inexpensive, but it's cheaper than buying hardware. The other product is going to be at Cisco Press, and they have, if you go to the Cisco Press site and you go down to the Certification Information tab, you can choose your favorite certification that you want to study for, and then it'll give you all their information about that. So they now have simulators which are more inexpensive. I do not have any idea about the quality or what these are like. I haven't used them, but they are there. They also have videos that are available, and you'll see a lot of times they'll have sales, 35, 40% off. Buy two, there's 30% right there. And then there's also these ICND 1 and 2 and the official library books that are available. And then there's these fancy premium editions, which are kind of nice because they include the ebook, but they also include a practice exam. The practice exams aren't as similar to a Cisco exam look and feel, but it is similar kinds of questions. The content is basically on par with the BOSIN exams from what I've seen. I've used those for some other exams, and the look and feel isn't the same, but it does the same kind of thing where you get the question wrong, or even if you get it right, it tells you why the answers are right and wrong, and the similar kind of thing. So that's kind of useful. There are official certification guides, and there are foundation learning guides. The official certification guides are maybe a little more terse, but if you already have some understanding, that's probably a better thing to study. The foundation learning guides are more verbose. They go into a lot more detail, a lot more background information, because it's running on the assumption that you have less experience, basically. They use the foundation learning guides in colleges when they teach Cisco. That's their source material. There's also these flashcards and portable command guides, and I have not used any of them. By the time you get to the CCIE level, flashcards start to become important because there's so many details to memorize. I didn't feel like the CCNA was difficult enough to require that, but I also had been doing this for a while by the time I took my CCNA. So, if that's what works for you, these are available. Oh, and there's these 31 days before your exam book, and I think that's got like one chapter a day to kind of build topics, but that's kind of the gamut of the best material I'm aware of. Oh, And almost all this stuff is also available if you have a Safari subscription, which is kind of nice.
Absolutely. So they're obviously that's a really important part is getting into the simulate type stuff and being able to do practice simulations and things like that. There were some other follow-up questions. Graham Mitchell again. Are there any lab setup files available for GNS3 where you could actually import a config file that would have some information? A lab. Oh man, here we go. Segue into the next topic.
One of these URLs is the correct one. Oh, come on. When all else fails, we use Google. I don't actually use this site that much, but I do know it's there. There we go, GNS3 Vault. There's this site called GNS3 Vault, and they have a variety of labs available. So there's labs covering a variety of different topics. So if you want to specifically look at frame relay, you can do that. There's some switching topics. You can go to the CCNA RNS, and then they have a couple of different labs that you can do. So you can go here, and there is somewhere there's a topology file you can download, and then it goes through and it says, hey, go do all of these things to kind of set something up. So I haven't used these myself, but I'm aware that they're there, and I know people who have used them, and they seem to be pretty happy with them.
That's pretty cool.
And then I know that it is on for the GNS3 recently did a crowdfunding fundraiser, I guess. They did some crowdfunding on a site that I've only used for that, but I don't remember what it's called. Anyway, they have they raised a bunch of money through crowdfunding, and they've been enhancing the software, and they're trying to include some layer 2 technologies and some other things. I don't know if you can still get in on that, but right now they've got a new version that's in alpha that's starting to add some features, and I think it's got some of the capabilities to do layer 2 have been added, but it uses IOU, which is iOS on Unix, which is Cisco internal only, so you're not really supposed to have access to it, so it goes even a little bit beyond the gray of GNS3, because with GNS3 you have to supply your own iOS images. And unless you have a Cisco contract, you can't really get the iOS images. So you have to find alternate routes. And IOU is sort of the same way. It's a Cisco internal product, so nobody's supposed to have their hands on it, but almost everybody does. Not that I would know anything about that.
Well, go figure. You segued right into something that somebody had asked about, the whole crowdfunding and all that. Another question that came up from Ray.
The reason I brought up the crowdfunding was because one of the things they're going to do with those enhancements is they're also going to start building some labs. They haven't started releasing them yet, but that is something that they're working on. I'm not sure what their timeline is. If you look at their crowdfunding site, if you just go to I think if you go to gns3.net, there's probably a link there, but you can find out more information.
Yeah, I believe somebody posted some of that here in the question forum here. One of the other things that came up is, there's been some recent track changes, to accommodate newer technologies. They gave an example of like IPv6 perhaps. Can you talk to some of that?
IPv6 has been on the CCNA for many years, actually. When I took my CCNA, I'm looking at my certificate right now. Or actually, I guess I don't have that up anymore. Oh well. When I took my CCNA, I think back in 2010, there was IPv6 on there. I'm sure there's more on there now, but there has been v6 on there for a while. I had another document that I did not actually pull up. Let's see. Let me see. Do we have another question, and maybe I can speak to that while I search for this?
I don't necessarily see any more right this moment, but I kind of had some questions, or and I just had some things I kind of wanted to throw out there. As far as the Symlet is concerned, are there any considerations that they need to be aware of? Are they able to tab and autocomplete commands and things of that sort? Should there be other things that they should be aware of?
All the sims I have used, they have the auto completion. You can do all the all those tabbings. You can do the question marks to get the context sensitive help. One of the things so like when you're doing the actual exam and you're in a Symlet, if you're going along and you hit question mark and you get command not implemented, that means you're going down the wrong trail. Find a different route. But that's what happens when you hit a part of the exam, or if you go into the Symlets don't have all of the Cisco iOS commands implemented, and so they basically just have some subset that's normally focused on the actual problem at hand. So if you get command not implemented, then you're in totally the wrong place. So that's sort of the way those are setting up. A graphic I pulled up earlier is actually here. So this is just kind of a nice introduction to networks. This is actually how they kind of split the classes when in a Cisco Network Academy, but it also gives you sort of a nice idea of where the knowledge levels are. So we've got the introduction to networks. That's kind of the basic IP, you know about a little bit about IP addressing, a little bit about subnetting, that sort of stuff. Basic connectivity, which I suspect everybody on this call has at least some knowledge of. And then the routing and switching essentials is going to be basic configuration of the routers, and then scaling is how to deal with making things bigger, interconnecting multiple pieces of equipment, and then getting into WAN connections, so connecting to other networks, but more importantly, connecting to the internet. Now, and if you have access to it, there's the Cisco Packet Tracer, but you can only get that if you're in the Cisco Network Academy. But it's kind of a nifty tool that lets you visualize how packets and frames move through the network. So you can actually hook up some routers and switches and put a server on each end. It's sort of like a sim. And you can say, hey, I want to send an email from point A to point B, and it actually shows you how the email moves through the network. It's kind of nifty to kind of visualize how it all works and how things fit together. And let's see, this is the one I wanted.
I can imagine. This is one I missed, and hate to kind of go back a little bit, but somebody had asked it. Have you heard of the Measure Up practice exams? Have you have any feedback on those?
I have heard of Measure Up. I don't really know anything about them. I'm pretty sure those are not a brain dump, so those should be a legitimate source of practice exams. The thing you want to watch for is you don't want to do the brain dumps where they're just giving you the questions that are actually asked on the exams and the answers, because then you're not actually learning the topic. That's not going to serve you in your career going forward. It just you're great. You have people who do that can pass the exam, but that doesn't prove that you know anything. And as soon as you start doing something in your job, then it's going to be pretty evident that you don't actually know it. So most people frown on the, well, it depends. Most Cisco certified people tend to frown upon the use of the brain dumps, because it undermines the whole certification programming. And if Cisco finds out that you use those, they will strip all of your certs away, which is suboptimal. Besides, you just want to really know it. So.
Absolutely, you kind of lose the value there. Another question actually did come through here too. Is Joe Clark is asking, are there any decent ways to get lab experience with the Nexus gear? And from what he had seen, the emulator wasn't street legal.
The emulator's not street legal, and it's missing all kinds of functionality. You can't really bring up routing protocols with it because it doesn't support multicast. And it's got a bunch of other problems. Cisco is coming out with a product called VIRL, V-I-R-L, which is the Virtual Internet Routing Lab, and that's going to be personal edition, and last I heard that was actually going to be free. And no, it's not developer, it's devnet.cisco.com. So what you want to do is oh, really? Maybe it's developer. So what you'll want to do, I'm glad that came up because I was going to forget all about that. You'll want to sign up on DevNet at Cisco's website, and it needs a Cisco ID, which is free, and if you already have one, you can just reuse that. But eventually, they're going to give you the option to download the viral, and then what that does, I can actually demo something close to that. This is what I'm demoing. What I'm launching right now is called Cisco Modeling Labs, CML, and basically it's essentially the same product, but CML is the commercial version that you might use for actually modeling a real-world network. Corporations will use that internally for their systems. Runs on VMware. And Viral is going to be more, it's a free version, scaled down slightly. Actually, I think the last I heard is it wasn't even scaled down, but it will let you run virtual Cisco routers that are fully sanctioned and use very little CPU, although some of them, like these CSRs, might use a lot of RAM. At some point, the NXOS is going to be added to that, and it actually uses titanium. But right now, I have it because I'm on a Cisco demo server, and I could fire this up, but it'd take a couple of minutes. Maybe I'll just fire it up for fun, and we'll eventually come back. But it uses the same. It uses titanium, and it's still missing functionality. There's stuff that does not work, and so it's not a super valuable. Depending on what you're trying to study, it's not necessarily of a lot of value yet. Cisco has this thing called Cloud Lab, which up until today or sometime very recently, you could, if you had some contact within Cisco, anybody, a Cisco rep, or if you know Matt from Cisco Learning Network, you can. He's on Twitter. I think it's Matt Saunders.
Go find him on Twitter, people.
There was another. That was the launch. That was the launching vBrownBag for the Cisco certification track. Was the Cisco Learning Network, and they were on there. But you can get it. You could get access to this cloudlab.cisco.com, which actually gave you virtual NXOS box and Nexus 1000V, so you could actually configure Nexus 1000V, put it in VMware, do all kinds of cool stuff with it. And they're transitioning that to something called dCloud, I think they were calling it for this. I guess this is demo cloud, dCloud, but it's not currently available to people external to Cisco, and they're migrating all of the Cloud Lab stuff to this dCloud. So right now there's no legal non-gray way to get access to that. But they are working on it. They have some, I was talking to the Viral guys at Cisco Live a couple of weeks ago, and they are, they have a prototype for the NXOS. So I think this month or maybe first part of next month, the Viral product should be available to download, and you can start playing with that. The switching stuff won't come at that point, but hopefully sometime in the next few months. I can't remember if they actually gave a timeline as to what they probably did give a timeline, because they don't really know where they're at with that. But and Tom Hollingsworth might talk about that to some degree or another when he does the CCNA data center sessions later this month. And as far as NXOS goes, I don't believe there's anything covering NXOS at the CCNA routing and switching level. That's all in the CCNA data center. So while it's fun to play with and to learn more about it, you don't actually need that for this particular certification. All right. Do we have
Awesome.
questions?
Somebody did point out that I guess you can get the basic 1000V free from Cisco.
Yes, and you can plug that into your VMware lab, and then you can start playing with that, and that will definitely do some of the switching stuff. I'm not sure if you can. I think if you run GNS3, you could probably jury-rig things to get them talking to each other, but I'm not sure. That's an interesting question.
With this crowd, there's always interesting questions.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think we need to talk about the exams anymore. I know I had more stuff planned, but now we went so far afield I don't even remember what I was going to do. Oh yeah. I guess a couple of. So I think this one we're probably not going to do a lot of demoing, and so this is going to be more. This is going to turn into more of the background type episode, an overview of the exam, and then we can talk about sort of common misconceptions for the next session. But maybe we can talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to pop back over to my GNS3. So we've got a network topology here consisting of 4 routers. This is all technologies that would be used in the CCNA. This took me, I don't know, 10 minutes to put together. So once you get GNS3 running, it's really easy to use because you can just click, take your router, drag it, drop it, boom, you got a new router, and you can do stuff with it. And then you click on your little Ethernet cable here, you choose your form, so you're probably going to do fast Ethernet or gig. Depending on how you've configured these, you might not be able to do gig, but everything supports the fast Ethernet. And then you can just click from one to the other, and I'll just do it anyway. Oh, I'd have to add a new module because it doesn't have enough virtual interfaces in, so you could stop it and add it. But I don't really want to go down that road right now because I'm more interested in playing with these. The outside of switching topics, this simple scenario here can cover all of the topics that you would be doing in the CCNA. So I've got a frame relay connection here, so you can practice frame relay. I've got a serial connection, so you can practice different kinds of serial connections. And then these guys are all connected together with some fast Ethernet. And these windows popping up tell you a little bit at a glance about what's going on. But really good practice is just to throw these together. They don't have any config, and then you can go in and you can just start configuring them. So you can show runs, do whatever it is that you want to do. You see I've got some interfaces set up, Loopback Interfaces. Something that I've learned from some of my studying is, so we've got 1, 2, 3 behind my window here, and 4. And so you can start coming up with an IP address scheme for your lab that is very predictable and easy to use. So we've got, I got to turn these, I don't know how well you can see those, but I've got this fast Ethernet 00, and this one is fast Ethernet 01. So we can see that my connection between R1 and R2 goes through, starts on fast Ethernet 0 on R1. And if we look at fast Ethernet 00 on R1, you can see I'm giving it an IP address of 10.0.12. So I'm setting this up with a /24. That's this guy here. And you can get creative with subnetting and experiment and do all kinds of stuff. This is fantastic stuff for practicing. If you actually spend any measurable amount of time playing with this stuff, CCNA will be pretty easy for you. The hands-on experience is really beneficial. But so everything in this network starts with 10.0 except for the loopback addresses. So these loopback addresses is just whatever the router number is repeated multiple times. So this is 1111, 2222, that one's 4444. Very predictable, very straightforward. The connection between R1 and R2, I'm using 10.0.12, so that's 1 connecting to 2, and then this interface on 1 is 1, the interface on 2 is 2, and so then you don't have to try to remember what IP addressing system it is, because then you know, like on this fast Ethernet 01, it's going to be 10.0.13 because it's connecting 1 and 3, and then this R1 can just be the .1 address, R3 can be the .3 address. We're not trying to conserve IP space in the lab. We're trying to just experiment with the technologies, see how things actually work, see what happens when IP addresses are in the wrong spaces, or when we have something misconfigured. So, for example, I'm going to go in. I'm going to do something a little creative here. I'm going to fire up an EIGRP session between these two routers, and let's see. Actually, make it. Section command is fantastic. So this is actually short for section, so I can say show, run, pipe it through this section, and then basically it does a regular expression search, and it'll come up and say, here's my section here. So what I'm actually going to do on this router is I'm going to go into my OSPF configuration, and I'm going to turn it off on the 10 network, which means it's going to lose its connection to everything. So now you see, oh, look, my connection's going down. And playing with this stuff, seeing what happens when sessions go up, seeing what happens when sessions go down, playing with debug commands. Oh, doing this in the wrong order. Let's see, what do I want to do? I want events. So you can play with debug commands, start to learn how these things work. I cannot remember if there's debug commands, but there probably are some debug command like output that is presented in the exam. But for like the sections where it's actually saying you should troubleshoot, there might give you the debugging output for an OSPF session coming up, or that's not working right for one reason or another. Some of these things should be in the labs. So if I go back here and I turn this back on, you can actually see a ton of information go by as it reestablishes all its connections with the neighboring routers. There's altogether too much information there. So I'm going to turn that off. Whoops, I have to turn that off for now. I'm going to try to turn that off by typing the correct command. There. So I don't want to keep it coming. But you can learn a ton of stuff by debugging the various protocols. So for example, we're learning that 224.005, it's a multicast address, is used for sending hellos. There's 005 and 006 used in OSPF. And those probably would be information that you would need to know at the CCNA level, what IP addresses the various protocols use. I think EIGRP uses 224.0010, RIP uses, I think, 009. So those are in the back of the, if you have the official certification guide, in the back of those, they have memorization tables where you can start to find all these sort of trivial things that you have to start memorizing. I mean, it's like we all know that HTTP uses port 80. We've memorized that. Some of these things you actually just have to memorize, because some of them you need to know for debugging purposes. But we can go back. We go back up here so we can see OSPF. We received a hello from the router identified as 3333. We know that's router 3. So we're on router 1. We can see we've received a hello from router 333. And we can see, I think we actually sent one to it first. Some link state. These are link state updates. But then we can see that we've got a neighbor change event. So now they're doing a DR BDR election, and then we've elected the backup designated router as 1111, and then the designated router as 3333. So now we've finished hello processing. So that sorts some of this is probably a little lower level than is necessary for CCNA, but it is kind of cool to see how these things work and have some familiarity with how things look when they are normal, and if you screw something up, and how they look when they're not normal. Because, I mean, it's one of the easiest way to debug things. So if I don't know what I don't have time to come up with something off the top of my head, but just in the course of playing with this stuff, you can learn a ton, because you're going to configure things wrong. I configure things wrong now. I've been doing this for 20 years. You're always going to configure something wrong, but being able to recognize what it is and find out what it is, those are really useful skills to have, both for the purposes of doing well on your exam and passing your exam, but also for if you're actually trying to fix something. And it's like, know what an LACP session actually looks like in a normal situation, and then the next time you fire up your 5.5 box and you try to set up your LACP session and it doesn't work, or maybe it's a 5.1 box. I think 5.1 has, I think the distributed switch has that. I can't remember for sure, but know what it looks like on both ends, and then that helps you do your job better, and makes you look good, right? That's what we all want.
Absolutely, man. That is definitely the goal.
So, and then in the next session, I'm going to do a little bit more down this road of more command line type stuff, and we'll be looking at the things that are common mistakes, common misconceptions, so that we can correct those early in your studying process and learning process, because a lot of times things look like they work one way, but then you learn how it works and you're like, oh, it actually works this way, like the way, and then sometimes there's confusing topics like the difference between a net mask and a wildcard mask, because wildcard masks are used in access control lists in Cisco land, and they're basically the opposite of a net mask, but not really. So it can get really confusing really quick, because you might see, when you don't understand how a given technology actually works, when you run into problems in the real world, then it makes it really hard to figure out why it's not working, because it's like, this should work, right?
Absolutely, that ought to be extremely valuable for those attending, or
So and I don't know what I want to do there. I don't know that it's necessarily strictly CCNA exam prep, but definitely good knowledge to have, and some of it will definitely be helpful to CCNA. But yeah, I'll try to keep it around. We'll keep it around those topics. Hopefully Ed will be with me and we can have a little bit more fun with that. Ed's really good with this stuff. He's well into his CCIE studies, and I'm only just beginning mine, so he really knows stuff really well.
Awesome. That ought to be very cool. So we are getting pretty close to the end of the hour here. And so recap again what we were doing with the giveaway, and we can maybe announce some, if you're done, announce some individuals winning some cool stuff.
So I have I think 3 copies of VMware for Network Administrators and 3 copies of the CCNA study guide, official certification guide. And I don't actually have them yet, but I've been given permission to give them away. So you can choose, the winners can choose between physical copy and ebook, and they can choose what book they want. And then we'll figure out who we're going to give those to for this session, and then anything that we've got left over, well, I have at least 2 copies of each reserved for after the fact, so you have until the end of June to, tweet questions or with the vBrownBag hashtag. Make sure ideally you include me, but I'll include a reference to me with the question. But I will try to keep a track of the vBrownBag hashtag and get any of those questions in there. And the best couple of questions that we get over that course will get sort of a first come, first serve of whatever we've got left.
Okay. Well, I would say that a Mr. Graham Mitchell, who's just been like completely involved in the conversation this whole time, been asking lots of questions and even been responding here in the question, that guy's a winner, man. So I would definitely say that he would get one. We have another guy named Joe Clark that asked a really good question around the Nexus gear. I thought that was pretty, that got some good discussion going. And then Ray Olander, he was pretty involved throughout, even actually going out there and providing information in the question area just to other people. So I'd say that those 3 individuals were definitely engaged throughout. So how do we want to go about that? Do you want me to just have them get me that information in here and get it over to you as far as contact information?
Probably the easiest thing to do would be to have them just send me an email. Scott M, SCOTTM, at mostlynetworks.com, MOSTLY, right? Yeah, MOSTLY, networks.com. Or you can send it to me on Twitter, and otherwise, then if for some reason that doesn't work, then we can, well, hopefully that works for everybody.
Yeah, that sounds like it ought to work. So if those 3 guys will definitely just kind of follow up with that email or, hit up Scott there on Twitter, he should be able to get you the details around getting your free goodies for being involved here. And with that being said, I mean, Scott, thank you very much for hopping on and sharing knowledge tonight with us. And we're definitely looking forward to, the next session and learning more about routers and switching and CCNA type stuff.
Looking forward to it. Oh, and especially if you've got questions or some topics that you specifically want us to cover next week, we can definitely do that as well.
So guys, keep that in mind. If you have specific things that you want covered next week, get them over to us, get them over to Scott, and we'll make sure to try to get those topics covered so that this is informative and helpful to those that are interested in this topic. With that being said, thank you for everybody for joining us today.